Well, to get more on this, I'm joined now from The Hague by Hisham al Alawi. He is Iraq's ambassador to the Netherlands. Sir, a pleasure having you on the Newsmakers. Thank you very much for joining us. The election results have been a surprise to many people around the world as they've been coming through. And one of the main questions, one of the immediate questions is, how bad does this government have to be that it defeated Daesh, one of the greatest threats to the entire world, not too long ago, yet only 45% of eligible voters voted, and those that did vote, voted for change?
Well, thank you for the opportunity to share our views with you today. Well, there are different ways of looking at the election results. Obviously, 44.5% is significantly less than the turnout that we had in the elections in 2014, 10, and at the end of 2015. But if you take into account the huge legacy that the current government had to deal with, and the campaign, the negative campaign that was that focused on calling on boycotting the elections, then 44.5% is not a bad turnout, especially if you take also into account that we continue to have a problem with internally displaced and some of the citizens also being in neighboring countries.
For those who did very well, let me, for example, look at Moqtada al Sadr, the Sadrists, and the communists. They campaigned on an anti-corruption platform, so clearly that resonated with millions of Iraqis. Does that suggest that your government is very corrupt?
Well, certainly the current government has proved to be more serious about fighting corruption. The Prime Minister has repeatedly said that this is one of the priorities for his government, but he was unable to do everything that he was thinking about because, as you mentioned, he was busy with fighting Daesh and liberating our cities and towns, and the environment, the overall environment, did not help him. He was also careful not to be accused that he is doing this or that because of the elections. He has a clear plan to continue with his measures that he started in order to deal with this issue as part of his overall plan to make our newly democratic institutions more effective, accountable, and able to use the limited resources that we have in order to continue with reconstruction and improving the health and education and the infrastructure that all the provinces need.
So, sir, given that Prime Minister Abadi and his partners didn't win, but also didn't lose categorically, I mean, it's not like those who did well overwhelmingly. Do you hope for some sort of consensus coalition that still eventually keeps Prime Minister Abadi as Prime Minister?
Certainly, this is the way forward. We do need to have at least 4 to 5 different blocs to come together and agree on a program for the next government and agree on the next Prime Minister. Among the listed possible candidates, Prime Minister Abadi continues to have the highest probability of being successful in establishing a coalition and forming the new government. He's also well trusted to lead the next government and continue his successes when it comes to strengthening security and national unity, as well as continue with his efforts as far as reconstruction and the development of the infrastructure and the key sectors of education and healthcare, in addition to building our regional and international relations in the way that the current government has done in the past 4 years.
Certainly. My final question to you, sir. Moqtada al Sadr, I know that he's unlikely to ever become Prime Minister as such, but would you be comfortable serving under his leadership?
Well, as you rightly indicated, it's unlikely that he would personally be the next prime minister. Indeed, he and other top religious scholars in Iraq have clearly indicated that they support a civilian government led by technocrats. As I said earlier, Prime Minister Abadi continues to be the most likely person to lead the next government. And we do hope that this process will not take long and we will have an all-inclusive, more effective government that is more capable of dealing with the challenges that we have in Iraq and continue with the successes we had when it comes to building our relations with our neighbors and our friends in the region and around the world.
Ambassador Hisham al Alawi, I thank you very much for joining us here on the Newsmakers. Let's broaden out this discussion with our panelists. From Baghdad, we have Saad al Muttalibi. He's a member of Baghdad's local government with the ruling State of Law Coalition. In Washington, D.C., we have Douglas Ollivant. He's a managing partner of Mantid International, a strategic consulting firm focused on Iraq. And from London, Altikriti, chief executive of the Cordoba Foundation, which aims to foster understanding between the Muslim world and the West. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us. Saad al Muttalibi, let me start with you. Moqtada al Sadr of the Mahdi army, that's the man who is potentially the kingmaker when it comes to the new government. Isn't that embarrassing to the current ruling government?
Yes, thank you very much. Well, this is politics, this is democracy. If he has gained the trust of the people and keep to the political system and the democratic way of governing, definitely it is a big setup for a set down for state of law and for other political parties. Of course, Hikmah, Mr. His Eminence Ammar al-Hakim also lost a great deal of seats. Everybody else lost seats. The only one who gained seats was Sairun, which is the bloc that belongs to Mr. Moqtada al Sadr. But that is the decision of the people. We raised a new form of governing, which is to go back to the original democratic system of the rule of the majority, an Iraqi majority, not a sectarian majority. But the people chose to go with the present system, which is the consensual democracy, that everybody rules and everybody is in the opposition.
I mean, you're saying you raised something that is more democratic, but throughout, those who have been interviewed spoke about getting rid of the political elites. They were talking about you. They were talking about the current rulers. They wanted rulers who are closer to the streets. That could be the Sadrists, it could be the communists even, and those together. So you're part of the elites that they were talking about, the old school. They want you out.
Well, if they could do that democratically, that is perfectly correct and perfectly right. We have no objection on the choice of the people. If the people choose that the new government to be formed of the Communist Party and the extremist, Muslim extremists, then that is their choice. No objection on that whatsoever.
Okay. Altikriti, you heard me speak to the ambassador Hisham al Alawi a little bit earlier on. You're hearing what Saad al Muttalibi is saying. Now, fold in your own thoughts with regards to this election and also give me your take on what they've had to say so far.
I think that these elections have been marked by a number of quite remarkable elements. The first is a low turnout. I heard how the ambassador mentioned the figure, the official figure, 44.5%, which is quite a respectable figure in even the best of democracies. But in reality, I think that the figure was far, far less. In fact, we have various areas and districts that saw less than even 20% of turnout. So I think there was a low turnout, and I think that part of that was the fact that, as you mentioned to Mr. Al Muttalibi, that people were sick and tired of the political system. There was and there is quite a large extent and quite a significant apathy. But also I think that the actual gains made by Sairun, led by Moqtada al Sadr, is fairly remarkable. And also the fact that there were various Shia candidates and Shia-led lists that were voted in by large numbers in Sunni areas. That, I think, is for anyone who's looking for a glimmer of hope for Iraq, I think that that's something to look at. But on the downside, I believe that the element of the militias basically becoming part of the political structure, that is incredibly concerning, and I think that that bears quite bad news for the future of Iraq generally.
Okay, and I'll ask you what it means for the Sunnis in a few minutes' time, but I want to go to Doug Ollivant for the moment. Sa'irun, communists and Shias who are on the more fundamentalist side of things, tied together or coming together in political coalition, absolute nightmare for the Americans, right?
Well, it would be, but I think there's a very low chance of that actually happening. I think if the West generally, not just America, but Europe, looks at these elections, first I want to echo what everyone else has said. These are obviously real elections. If the elites were cooking the books on this election, this is not the result we would be seeing. This is not the Syrian election where the president gets 90%. So this is a real election, and that's an accomplishment, and we should just pause a second and recognize that. But moving to the results, at one level they are disappointing, but I think we also need to look at the big picture. Yes, the Sadrist trend won the most seats, but still only won about 16.5% of the total seats of the Iraqi parliament. They're going to have to put together a coalition, and whether they are, the lead party in that coalition is yet to be seen. Sure, would the West have preferred, and perhaps Iraqi elites have preferred, an election in which Prime Minister Abadi's victory list won 70 seats? I think all of us probably would have. But this is the reality we live in, and we can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. This is a good result that I think is going to result in a good government for Iraq. It's not going to be perfect. Iraq is not going to get fixed in the next year or the next 4 years. But this is a better result than we saw in 2014, a better result that we saw in 2010, I think, as far as getting Iraq on the right track moving forward.
Saad al Muttalibi, given that both the Americans and the Iranians are a little bit worried about the results, isn't that a good thing for Iraqi sovereignty?
Well, we in state of law, our objection was to have a balanced relationship with the regional government and make sure to strengthen our relationship with the United States as an acknowledgement of the importance of having an excellent relations. We have a strategic agreement with the United States, and that strategic agreement means a lot to us and means a lot to the Shiite and the Sunnis and the Kurds, and we must take advantage of that to resolve some of the political issues in Iraq with the help of the United States. Unfortunately, now we have a picture that I cannot imagine what is going to happen. The communists and the Sadrists, who were the main opposition or the main militias that were taking part in fighting the Americans, now if they form a government, I have no idea how the international picture will become. Saying that, we have a lot of signs that indicating that the Sa'irun are more inclined to the Saudi position and anti-Iran. Now, this is a dangerous game. Iraq cannot be part of regional alliances. We cannot be against Saudi Arabia, and we cannot be against Iran or Turkey. Okay. Iraq is not in a position to become or to wage a proxy wars against our neighbors. We need to have a very stable, very balanced, very well-balanced relationship with our neighbors. We need Saudi Arabia, we need Iran, we need Egypt, even we need Syria and Turkey. We have to have a balanced relationship. Going to the extremist way, I think that will be damaging to Iraq and to the region.
But might it more reasonable, might it be,
after all,
certainly, Mr. Al Muttalibi, might it be a more reasonable interpretation that it's not that they want to damage ties with Iran, it's that they don't want to be controlled by Iran anymore? And there's a difference between the two.
There is no Iranian control in Iraq. This is a myth. This is definitely a myth, as the myth that Turkey controls Iraq or Saudi Arabia controls Iraq. Naturally, regional neighboring countries have good social and political relationship with Iraq. This is only natural. But that does not mean in any way that Iran controls me or controls Mr. Maliki or Mr. Alawi or Mr. Osama Nujayfi. This
Understood.
is a myth.
Okay.
Unfortunately, many people who made this myth believed it.
Okay, so Altikriti, it's a myth that Iran controls Iraq to some extent at least. And what Mr. Al Muttalibi is saying is that those new guys in Sa'irun, if they're going to drive this process forward, are going to wreck regional ties and cause problems. And let me then add to that, what does this mean for the Sunnis?
Well, I mean, I think that the way that Mr. Saad al Muttalibi puts things, I only wish that that were true, and I only hope that that is what will become, because that would be an ideal situation for Iraq to be in. However, I think that it's slightly, well, it's quite untrue to say that Iran doesn't have a grip. Maybe not 100% control, no one is claiming that, but it has a firm grip on Iraqi affairs. It's only, you know, it's a well-known fact that the most important person in Iraq during the war on Daesh was Qasem Soleimani. That Iranian fighters were flooding, you know, Iraq in claiming that they were going to be part of that particular battle. But in any case, I mean, that's by the by. It's become a well-known fact. It's become part of Iraq's political life, unfortunately, for the past 15 years. So it's something that Iraqis have come to deal with one way or another. I also agree with Saad al Muttalibi in terms of the danger of Iraq playing regional politics and siding by one particular element, such as Saudi Arabia, against another major player, such as Iran, or any other. But also to claim that Iraq hasn't played regional politics is also disingenuous, with all due respect. Iraq has clearly been on the side of Syria in its conflict against its own people. So in any case, I mean, I think that, you know, there are very good things and idealistic, proper things that Saad al Muttalibi said, but I do think that there is a disparity with reality. Now, coming to the question that you asked regarding the Sunnis, bear in mind that these elections happened while still more than 2 million people were away from their own homes, whether it be in Diyala, in Salah ad-Din, in Anbar, as well as in Nainawa, particularly in Mosul. Most of those have no prospect of returning to their homes in the foreseeable future. Some might even claim or be in a situation whereby they should look forward to being in their refugee camps for the next probably 3, 4, 5 years even. So we have an incredible imbalance within Iraqi demographics as we speak, and the threat and the underlying issues which might then become overwhelming major issues in the near future, such as the rearing and the raising of a new generation of extremists one way or another, ideological, religious or whatever, is a serious prospect. The fact that more and more people are becoming totally apathetic as to the reality of Iraq as a one country is also a real prospect, and we must contend with that.
Okay, let me go to Doug then, and let me ask you, Doug, if they have a big headache, whether at the Pentagon or State Department or the White House now, with regards their Iraq policy while this new government gets formed. Given that, for example, Moqtada al Sadr might be the kingmaker, the man that Lieutenant General Ricardo Sanchez in 2004 said of, quote, "The mission of the US forces is to kill or capture Moqtada al Sadr. That's our mission." That man driving the process, big headache for the US government?
Well, that was 15 years ago, and people change and issues change, and you have to put some things behind you. So no, I don't think we have a major problem. Look, when the Sadrists went to celebrate their victory in Tahrir Square, they did not shout US out, they shouted Iran out. They saw the victory of the Sadrists, again, their 16% victory, their plurality victory, as being a vote against Iranian influence. You did not hear the U.S. mentioned in their celebrations. So I think they are looking for balance in their relations, and whether it's a myth or not, they believe that Iran has too strong a hold on Iraq, and they're looking to change that. And to the extent that that favors the Saudis, who are a United States ally, that's great. The United States wants a neutral Iraq. We know that Iraq is never going to be an active participant in an anti-Iranian coalition. We know that. We want them to occupy a neutral ground. Now, of course, neutrality is in the eye of the beholder, but certainly the United States and the Gulf states think that Iraq leans a little closer, too close to Iran. If this election helps pull that back a little bit, we're all about that. We think this is a good result. Very quickly with the Sunnis, they're in a terrible place. 4 years ago, Iraq Sunnis were still, though politically disempowered, the cultural, economic, social elite of Iraq. 4 years under ISIS has changed that. Their cities are leveled. They've been living in IDP camps. Their kids haven't been getting educated. They've been subject to disease. They have suffered a huge blow. Reintegrating Iraq Sunnis in whatever place they find in Iraq will be a major challenge for the next government, as of course will be repairing relationships with the Kurdish provinces.
Okay, I'll let that be the final word. Douglas Ollivant, Altikriti, and Saad al Muttalibi, pleasure getting all your thoughts. Thanks for joining us on the Newsmakers.